Stop explaining yourself. Let me ask you something. Why are you still trying to get people to understand you? Why are you burning energy crafting these perfect little explanations just so someone else might approve of your choices? You are not a TED talk. You are not a press release. You are not here to justify your dreams, your goals, or your boundaries. You are here to live your life, not to make it digestible for everyone else.
Listen, I get it. We've all been trained since childhood to explain ourselves, to raise our hands, to ask for permission, to wait until someone says yes, before we believe it's okay to do something different, to be someone different.
But you're not a child anymore, and you don't need permission. You've got one life, one shot, and you're going to waste it trying to convince people who don't even live in your skin that your choices are valid.
No, stop. You don't need to explain why you're tired. You don't need to explain why you cut someone off. You don't need to explain why you walked away from something that drained your soul. You don't need to explain why your boundaries are your boundaries. You're allowed to evolve. You're allowed to grow. You're allowed to want something different even if it doesn't make sense to anyone else. Especially then, let me tell you something powerful. Silence is a decision. And sometimes silence is the loudest form of self-respect. When you stop explaining yourself, you stop giving other people the blueprint to manipulate you. When you stop explaining, you take your power back. When you stop explaining, you create room to listen to your own gut, your own voice, your own truth. Because here's the truth, the people who get you really get you, they don't need explanations. And the ones who constantly demand one, they're not listening to understand, they're listening to judge. So stop handing them your energy on a silver platter. You don't owe anyone an essay on your healing. You don't owe anyone a PowerPoint on your peace. You just owe it to yourself to own your life without apology. Let them think what they want. Let them talk. Let them misunderstand you. That's not your job. Your job is to be authentic, not to be understood. Because here's what happens when you stop explaining. You get lighter, you get clearer, you get free. And that's the whole point, isn't it? You didn't come this far just to be a watered-down version of yourself for someone else's comfort. You came this far to own your damn story, so stop explaining. Start living. Let them figure it out or not. Either way, you'll be too busy creating a life you're proud of to even notice. Your life doesn't require validation, only alignment with your truth. This statement holds the power to liberate you from the endless cycle of seeking approval, fitting into molds, and shaping yourself into what others expect. Too many people live their entire lives as a performance. From childhood, we are taught to please, to explain, to justify. We say, "I'm sorry," for simply existing in a space that makes someone else uncomfortable. We water down our opinions so they're easier to swallow. We tiptoe around our dreams, dressing them up with disclaimers like, "I know it sounds crazy, but," as if our deepest desires need a PR team to defend them. You don't need a jury to approve your passions. You don't need a panel to validate your choices. You only need one thing, alignment, and alignment doesn't scream, it doesn't justify, it doesn't over-explain. Alignment is calm. It's a quiet conviction inside you that doesn't require applause. The moment you stop waiting for permission is the moment you start living. People will always have something to say. If you chase their validation, you will live in a prison built out of their opinions. One day you'll wake up and realize that all the explaining didn't protect you, it just drained you. It turned your life into a series of negotiations, trade-offs, and fake smiles. It taught you to wear a mask, to become fluent in the language of what will they think, instead of what do I need. Alignment demands that you stop asking others for directions to a destination only your heart can find. It requires that you listen to yourself even when it's uncomfortable. Especially then, because truth doesn't always feel good at first. It challenges, it stretches, it disrupts, but it also heals, it frees, it anchors you. You don't need to explain why your path looks different, why you're walking away from things others would cling to, why your version of success doesn't match theirs. You only need to know that you are at peace with yourself, that when your head hits the pillow at night, you can breathe without heaviness in your chest. You are not here to live someone else's script. You are not a character in someone else's story. You are the author of your own, and authors don't explain every line they write. They create from the gut, from the fire, from the place deep down that knows what is right for them even when the world disagrees. You will lose people. That's part of alignment. When you stop explaining yourself, some people will call you rude, selfish, arrogant. They are not used to people with boundaries.
They are not used to people who say no without softening the blow, but their discomfort is not your responsibility. It never was. Your job is not to shrink to keep others comfortable. Your job is to expand, to evolve, to grow into the fullness of who you are. That means you will outgrow some relationships. That means some people will misunderstand you. Let them gossip, let them guess. Let them label you. Your truth doesn't become less true because someone doesn't get it. Their confusion is not your call to explain. It's your cue to keep going. When you live in alignment, your energy changes. You stop chasing, you start attracting. You stop auditioning for roles you never wanted. You start creating space for people who see you without needing subtitles. You begin to trust your intuition more than you trust the opinions of strangers. You start walking into rooms without wondering if you belong. You realize you belong everywhere you decide you do, and that knowing makes you unshakable. You don't flinch when questioned. You don't panic when challenged. You don't crumble when someone doesn't agree. You've made peace with being misunderstood, because you've found something more valuable than approval: self-trust. Self-trust is built in moments when you choose yourself, even when it's inconvenient. When you say no even when it would be easier to say yes. When you follow your instincts even when logic says otherwise. When you stand by your boundaries even when people push. Every time you honor your truth without explaining it away, you strengthen your foundation. And a strong foundation doesn't wobble when life shakes. It stands firm, it holds, it doesn't crack because someone else doesn't like the structure. You become solid, rooted, grounded, not in arrogance. Not in pride, but in clarity, in integrity. This doesn't mean you never communicate. It doesn't mean you become cold, detached, or closed off. It means you no longer perform emotional labor to convince others that you are worthy. You no longer take on the role of tour guide through your soul. You stop giving out maps to people who only want to critique the route. You start living like your choices are enough, because they are. Even the ones that don't work out, even the ones that confuse others, they are still yours, and that ownership matters more than anyone's opinion. You will feel resistance, internally and externally. The world teaches us to explain, to smooth things over, to seek consensus, but alignment asks you to hold steady even when it's lonely, even when the silence after your boundary feels awkward, even when someone's disappointment weighs on you like a brick. You hold the line not because it's easy, but because it's true. And in that truth, you find power. You find peace. You find that the people who really matter don't need a 20-step justification for your evolution. They respect it, they honor it, they cheer you on even if they don't fully understand. When you choose alignment over validation, your whole life recalibrates. You start showing up differently. You stop second-guessing yourself. You stop rehearsing conversations in your head. You stop trying to prove that your heart is in the right place. You simply know that it is, and that knowing allows you to move through life with a sense of quiet confidence, a sense of internal authority. You stop looking outward for signs that you're doing the right thing. You start trusting that the whisper inside you knows where you're going, and the more you live this way, the more magnetic you become. Not because you're performing, but because you're real, because you radiate something people can't fake. Self-ownership, alignment is magnetic. It pulls in the people, opportunities, and experiences meant for you. And it repels what isn't. That's not rejection. It's protection. That's not loss. It's redirection. And when you understand that, you stop fearing what falls away. When you stop explaining yourself, you start welcoming it. You start seeing every misalignment as a clearing, as proof that you're making space for better, for deeper, for truer. You begin to recognize that the more you align with your truth, the less you need to speak it. You just live it, and that speaks louder than anything you could ever explain, ChatGPT said. The need to explain is often a fear of being judged, not a sign of respect. We think we're being polite, thoughtful, maybe even mature when we go out of our way to explain ourselves, our choices, and our feelings. But more often than not, what's really happening beneath the surface is fear. Fear of being seen the wrong way, fear of being misunderstood, fear of being labeled selfish, cold, too much, or not enough. So we rush in with words to soften the impact. We try to preempt judgment by giving people the backstory, the context, the why. We lace our boundaries with disclaimers. We add footnotes to our decisions. We turn our no into a long-winded apology with justifications stacked like sandbags, hoping they'll prevent the flood of disapproval we imagine is coming. But let's be honest, when you feel the need to explain everything, you're not doing it out of clarity or confidence. You're doing it because deep down, you're afraid someone will think something about you that you can't bear to sit with. We've been trained to believe that other people's perceptions of us are more important than our own peace. That if someone doesn't understand why we said what we said or did what we did, then we've failed somehow. That we owe them a neatly packaged narrative so they can walk away with the right impression. But here's the truth. The people who are determined to judge you will do it no matter how much you explain. You can give them every detail, every reason, every emotional breadcrumb, and they'll still twist the story to fit their own lens. Because their judgment isn't based on your truth, it's based on their filters, their fears, their projections. So every time you over-explain, hoping to avoid judgment, you're fighting a battle you can't win. And in the process, you're draining yourself for people who probably won't change their minds anyway. This habit of over-explaining is sneaky. It disguises itself as humility. It pretends to be empathy. But really, it's a fear reflex. It's the nervous system saying, let me keep the peace. Let me manage how you see me. Let me make myself small enough that you'll approve. But peacekeeping isn't peace if it comes at the cost of your authenticity. Approval isn't love if it requires you to abandon yourself. You don't owe anyone an explanation for being who you are, especially not when that explanation is just a shield for your fear of being judged. The moment you stop explaining, you start trusting that your truth doesn't need packaging, trusting that the people who matter don't need convincing, trusting that your value isn't up for debate. It's not that communication is bad. Communication is powerful, vulnerability is necessary, but there's a difference between speaking your truth and pleading for understanding, between sharing from a place of strength and explaining from a place of fear. When you speak your truth without needing to be validated, that's powerful. When you explain yourself over and over to make others comfortable, that's self-betrayal. You teach people how to treat you by how much you tolerate, by how many times you fold yourself into a version of you they can understand. But what if you stopped doing that? What if you allowed yourself to be seen without translation, without performance, without softening your edges so you don't get labeled as difficult? Most of the time, the fear of being judged is worse than the judgment itself. We imagine scenarios in our heads that never actually happen. We anticipate rejection, criticism, side eyes, silence, so we explain in advance. We explain too much. We explain when no one even asked. We live in defense mode even when no one's attacking. And that's the real cost of this fear. It robs you of your energy. It robs you of your presence. It keeps you stuck in a loop where your worth is dependent on how well you can convince others that your choices are valid. That loop is exhausting. It's also unnecessary because when you really start to live in your truth, you realize something wild. Being judged isn't actually that bad. People judge you no matter what. You could be kind, generous, thoughtful, and still get called selfish. You could be confident and clear, and still get called arrogant. You could be soft and forgiving, and still get called weak. There is no perfect version of you that will be immune to judgment. So if you're going to be judged anyway, why not be judged while living your truth? Why not be misunderstood for being authentic instead of being praised for being someone you're not? We think explaining ourselves will protect us from being seen in the wrong light, but all it really does is keep us stuck in a pattern of self-doubt, because the more you explain, the more you start to question yourself. You start wondering, did I say it the right way? Did they understand? Should I have added more context? And suddenly you're no longer grounded in your truth. You're lost in someone else's reaction. You're performing emotional gymnastics to avoid something that might not even be real. That's not clarity, that's anxiety in disguise. The truth is, people will project their own fears onto you. If they're uncomfortable with boundaries, they'll call you cold. If they don't understand your healing, they'll call you distant. If they don't value your growth, they'll call you fake. That's not about you, that's about them, and you trying to explain yourself into being more acceptable won't change their relationship with their own discomfort. What it will do is pull you away from yourself, from your clarity, from your strength, and the more you do that, the more you lose sight of who you are without the noise. Imagine what it would feel like to not explain. To say what you mean and let it land however it lands. To walk away without leaving a trail of justifications behind you. To hold a boundary without padding it with apologies. That's real power. That's what self-trust looks like.
It's not loud, it's not aggressive, it's quiet and rooted. It's a calm inner knowing that says, I don't need you to agree, I just need to honor myself. And that shift, it changes everything. You stop fearing judgment. You stop contorting yourself to avoid discomfort. You start making decisions faster. You start speaking more clearly. You start taking up space. Not because you're trying to prove anything, but because you finally understand that your value doesn't live in someone else's opinion of you. It lives in how honest you are with yourself, in how willing you are to stand in your truth, even if your voice shakes, even if it's messy, even if no one claps. When you let go of the fear of being judged, you become unstoppable. You stop asking for permission. You stop apologizing for evolving. You stop managing how others perceive you and start managing how you feel in your own skin. That's the real work, not explaining, not defending. Just being fully, boldly, without apology, because the people who truly see you, they don't need the backstory, they feel you, they recognize the truth when they see it, and they don't need an explanation to know that its real. Silence is a boundary, not a weakness sonnet. Silence is one of the most misunderstood forms of communication. We're taught from a young age that silence equals passivity, that if you don't speak up, you must not care enough or know enough. But in reality, silence can be one of the most powerful ways to protect your energy, your peace, and your truth. Silence isn't about ignoring people. It's about choosing not to explain yourself where explanation is a waste. It's about recognizing when someone is trying to pull you into a conversation that isn't rooted in respect, curiosity, or care, but in control, manipulation, or projection. And in those moments, silence is not weakness. It's wisdom. There's a difference between being silent because you're afraid and being silent because you're done. When you're afraid, silence feels heavy. It's filled with shame, uncertainty, self-doubt. But when you're done, when you've outgrown the need to convince, the need to defend, the need to be understood by people who don't listen anyway, your silence becomes your armor. It becomes your answer. It becomes the line that says, I'm no longer entertaining this version of me you've made up in your head. I'm no longer feeding a conversation that only drains. I'm no longer putting my soul on display for judgment under the spotlight of someone else's discomfort. People will push back against your silence. They'll say you're being rude, immature, dismissive. Because your silence removes the access they once had. It removes the power they once felt when you would rush in to explain, to justify, to apologize. Silence strips that away, and for people used to your performance, your emotional labor, your endless talking, they'll feel offended. But their offense is not your obligation. Their reaction is not your responsibility. Silence is how you hold your boundary without having to prove it exists. We're living in a culture that values noise. Loud opinions, constant responses, instant explanations. Everyone wants to be heard, but very few people want to listen. In a world like that, silence becomes rebellion. It becomes resistance to the idea that you have to answer every accusation, respond to every message, clarify every choice. You don't. You are allowed to pause. You are allowed to disconnect. You are allowed to say nothing, not because you're weak, but because your peace matters more than the performance. Because you know that not every situation deserves your voice. Silence is also space. Space for you to hear your own thoughts, space for clarity to rise up, space to notice how your body feels when you're around certain people, space to step back and observe rather than react, because when you're constantly explaining yourself, you're reacting. You're trying to manage perceptions, but when you're silent, you create a buffer between your truth and their opinions. You get to sit in the stillness and ask yourself, do I even care to continue this conversation? Is this connection worth the cost of my energy? Most of the time, silence reveals the answer. Silence is the pause that precedes transformation. When you stop explaining, when you stop reacting, when you stop trying to convince, you make space for deeper decisions. You see who sticks around when you're no longer performing. You see who gets uncomfortable when you're no longer accessible 24/7. You see who respects you enough to meet you in stillness instead of demanding noise. And yes, silence will cause some people to leave. Let them. Because if your voice was the only thing keeping them close, their connection to you was never real. It was based on access, not alignment. Owning your silence takes courage. It takes emotional maturity to recognize that not every comment needs a comeback. Not every accusation needs an answer. Not every misunderstanding needs a monologue. It takes strength to say less, especially when everything inside you wants to defend, correct, or clarify. But strength isn't in the speaking. It's in the choosing where to speak, when to speak, and who gets to hear your truth. That's where the power lies. Silence also allows you to reclaim your time. Because every explanation takes energy. Every justification takes minutes off your life that you'll never get back. And when you start seeing time as sacred, you stop wasting it on conversations that go in circles. You stop talking to be polite. You stop responding out of guilt. You stop filling the air just to avoid discomfort. You realize that silence is not emptiness. It's presence. It's the space where your values live. The space where your boundaries breathe. The space where your voice becomes more intentional. Some people will try to break your silence with guilt. They'll say, "You used to tell me everything," or "I just want to understand." But wanting to understand and being willing to understand are not the same. If someone consistently interrupts you, dismisses your feelings, twists your words, what are you really explaining for? If someone makes you feel unsafe every time you open your mouth, why would your silence be the problem? People who respect you will respect your silence. They won't demand that you unpack your soul on command. They'll wait until you're ready, or they'll be okay with the fact that you might never be, and that kind of space, that kind of grace. That's what you deserve. Silence is also about trust. Trusting that your presence speaks for itself. Trusting that your boundaries don't need to be argued, they need to be lived. Trusting that your worth is not proven through endless conversation. Trusting that your energy is precious and not everyone gets a piece of it. And most of all, trusting that it's okay if someone walks away because you chose silence. That's not loss. That's alignment. That's life sorting itself out on your behalf. And the more you trust that, the less tempted you are to break your silence just to keep people comfortable. There's something deeply healing about choosing silence where you once felt obligated to speak. It reclaims your power. It reminds you that you are not responsible for managing everyone's emotions. It breaks cycles of codependency and over-explaining. It shifts your focus back to yourself, your needs, your peace. Because at the end of the day, not every version of you needs to be explained. Some parts are sacred. Some decisions are private. Some boundaries don't come with a user manual. They just exist. And your silence protects them. People will project all kinds of meanings onto your silence. Let them. They'll fill in the blanks with their own insecurities, their own narratives. Let them. That's not your story to control. That's not your space to clean up. Your silence is not a void that needs to be filled. It's a stance. It's a signal. It's a form of communication that says, I am no longer available for this energy. And if they don't understand that, explaining it won't help. Silence is the final word in a conversation that no longer serves you. It's the line you draw in the sand without lifting a finger. It's the door you close with grace, not noise. It's your declaration that peace, privacy, and presence are no longer negotiable terms in your life. And once you own that, nothing feels missing anymore in the silence you used to feel.